Welcome back to the PR Bunker podcast. Today, we're digging into the evolving world of public relations with Jay Kolbe, founder of Impact Partners. We talk about strategic communications for family offices and funds, how AI is reshaping the agency landscape, why relationships and social psychology still drive great PR, and how authenticity and storytelling cut through the noise. It's a sharp conversation about where our industry is headed and what actually matters. And here's your host, Don Martelli.
What's up, folks? Welcome back to The Bunker. Today's guest is Jay Kolbe of Impact Partners, or as we say here in Boston, Impact Partners. Jay, pleasure to meet you. You and I connected from a previous guest, our mutual friend Bob, who you know. And you and I had a really interesting conversation. Typically, these convos go for a couple minutes, but you and I talked for a good 45 minutes. We talked about family, we talked about kids, life, the agency grind, and all of that. But thank you for joining the PR Bunker. As we get going here, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, tell us about your work, and tell us about Impact Partners.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me, Don. Yeah, it was our first conversation. There was a lot to connect on, to put it mildly. So, yeah, it was awesome. But Impact Partners, we're a strategic communications and PR firm that services family offices, funds, and founders. So the funds part of that, you're looking at venture capital, private equity, private credit, venture debt, growth equity, a whole basket full of different things in there. Founders really kind of across a lot of different types of tech. I mean, whatever's hot, right? You go from AI to crypto to, ad
Sure.
marketing technologies, social media, everything in between. So, yeah, whatever's trending there. And then the family office one is really kind of the unique one because it's a group of people who are traditionally pretty private. In setting up a firm is that they were really strategic for opening up doors with top tier media because they literally can't get access to these people. So, I mean, they will call us, editors in chiefs, call us and say,
Mm.
you guys doing? Like, these people don't talk. We can't get in front of them. How are you doing PR for them? So it's always fun, a little strong zag when everyone else is zigging to do something that's really an outlier. And, but what we learned from them is, they're strong participants in the funding and the capitalization stack for innovation. You're looking at an asset class that's, by 2030, that's going to be pushing, you know, 4.5 to $5 trillion, which is, which may, is in the ballpark of like hedge funds as far as like total assets under management. It's a group of people who needs to learn how to organize, communicate, and brand themselves the way that anyone else has like branded themselves when they're providing capital to startups, because that is a part of value creation. And if you don't know how to do that with strategic communications and PR, you know, then
Yeah.
you're leaving a little on the table, in my opinion.
Yeah, a little bit. Just a little bit.
Yeah, we saw VCs do this for a long time in startups. Look at Silicon Valley and any VC out there. That brand matters, and in valuations and everything. So, why shouldn't family offices who are growing as an asset class and pretty involved in a lot of different ways of like funding many different things from philanthropies to actual startup technologies, why shouldn't they
Sure.
also use the same strategies that the VCs have used and every Fortune 1 in 500 company has used to create value for
Yeah.
decades? So
Love it.
that's
How big?
that's what
How,
we'll skip it.
how big's the firm?
We're about 13 people, 30 clients or
That's
so.
great. Excellent.
The family office is the smallest bucket.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the largest is probably, the founders, the vendor, the tech, and the VCPEs.
Yeah,
That's kind of
got
the
it.
backbone.
Okay.
It changes every few years or so.
Sure. Sure.
It was a big part of our firm pre-2023, and then that market changed.
Mm-hmm.
The best part about what we see there is like when most people talk about how you capitalize things vertically. So you're a VC, and so you just kind of speak from the VC pulpit. But we work with, all kinds of different types of sources of capital. So we have a horizontal view into how you capitalize innovation.
Nice.
And I don't think that that's super prevalent. And I think it also helps you, see a lot of things coming. You kind of see the handoffs, like when founders are like saying, hey, I'm done with talking to VCs and I'm through with that racket. I'm looking for family offices. You see how like that evolves in that
Sure.
goes from not being anything you ever hear, and then 2, 3 years later, it's like all you hear.
Yeah.
And so That's cool.
Okay.
I mean, we'd experience that.
Got it. Well, if there's anything I learned through interviewing other communications professionals, none of us started in the place where we ended up. Right? For me, I was going to be a sports writer and cover, the Sox, Pats, Celtics, Bruins, and then a sports writer convinced me to cover, general assignment, and that kind of propelled me into PR. Clearly, when you and I spoke, we kind of talked about your journey. You didn't wake up one day and say, "This is what I want to do." We kind of find our own way. So take us a little bit back. I mean,
Yeah.
about the early days, right? Maybe before wives and kids and like your early stage of your career. How'd you get here?
By happenstance, I guess, is the short answer. I never really knew. I knew directionally what I wanted to do, but I didn't know specifically what I wanted to do when I was coming up through school. And it was kind of like the advertising thing, and then it was, journalism, and then it was kind of social psychology, and I just kind of like floated. And I always knew I loved media and I loved how people interacted with it. So that was probably the basis of those three things. And so I ended up graduating. And I had a really great, from university, I had a really great counselor who like kind of connected the dots for me and was kind of like, hey, you've kind of been on all these different things. Have you thought about public relations? Because they kind of all flow into that. And basically the gist of what he was saying is you can learn public relations. You don't have to study it, right, in school. So like you got like really great differentiated kind of source materials for that, but maybe not the thing. And so I actually went out to New York. My brother was living there. He invited me to come stay with him. Having a free place to land in New York is highly strategic.
Absolutely.
So did that. And actually how I found my first job in PR is actually a really funny story. It's an interesting story. I was actually temping at the time and interviewing and sending out my resume and all that stuff. And not having, a public relations degree, a communications degree, did make that a little more complicated. But I actually ended up going into a Barnes and Noble one day in Hoboken, New Jersey, and I pulled a book off the shelf that said the spine. It was titled "How to Find a Job in New York City," and I'm like,
Nice.
"Well,
Nice.
it's
Perfect.
like you're screaming to me." Yeah, right. And so I opened it up, and there was a section on PR, and I was like, "Okay." Flip to that section, and it was a training program at Ruderfin Public Relations.
Nice.
They called the ET or Executive Training Program. And it was basically meant for people who wanted to get into PR who may not have had, the background to date. And I was like literally like the most serendipitous moment in my entire life.
Hmm.
I wrote down the email for the person that was running the program, slid the book back on the shelf, walked out, and went back to my apartment and emailed her a bunch of writing samples and went in, did some interviews, got in there, and the rest is
Yeah.
history.
I love it, man, because everybody I've spoken to during the PR Bunker podcast, nobody says I went to college because I wanted to go into public relations or marketing. They want to go into business. They kind of fall into this, and like everybody has that Barnes and Noble moment. I had mine when I was staring at a co-op when I was at Northeastern University, and I had two options: either go drive a Budweiser truck or go write about dead people at the Boston Globe because I was too late to the program. And I'm like, I was a business major. How the fuck do I know about journalism? It's like, all right, shit. Always been a pretty decent writer. Went to the Globe, started writing about dead people, and I was like, in PR, it's like every day is kind of like a loud family reunion. Phones are ringing, emails flying, people yelling at you, people love you, hate you. You're just dealing with the scrum every single day. And I think that's kind of what drives us. So, my next question is clearly from the Barnes and Noble days to today, right? You clearly got still books on your shelf behind you, which we'll get to in a second. But let's talk about the state of the agency world. I mean, you and I first talked, we talked about transparency, we talked about media, we talked about AI. There's no short of topics for us to discuss, not just for our clients, but our business. I mean, it's dramatically changed since when you and I were Cub PR people. So, in your brain, and from an impact partners perspective, where is the state for you all? How are you managing and maneuvering in this pretty a kind of gray space these days with AI tools, transparency, media, the fluctuation of reporters coming and going, and it's yet again messy. But I think as PR people, we tend to kind of follow time. So, what's your take on all that?
What I think the through line's been there for a while. Just to look at like self-publishing, social media, digital, anything, the ability to kind of broadcast very quickly to a large audience is, it's been around. We're pushing decades at this point. And so that to me was the fundamental change in PR, particularly from like my social psychology background, where I came into the industry like really like looking at like how do you get people to kind of like go where you want them to go? How do you orchestrate them? What are their triggers? What are their hopes? Like how do you understand their pathways? And I don't know that a lot of PR people necessarily enter the workforce with that kind of foundation. I have not met a lot of them, which it always was one of my biggest surprises. Is like, how come nobody has, a degree in social psychology? I mean, I could count on one hand in 27 years the number of people I've met who actually
Hmm. It's
like
rare.
are
It's rare.
and so you kind of realize that the mechanics tend to turn into like it's relationships. It's not like you have to study like how people tick to have great relationships. You can be authentic and transparent and all that kind of stuff works. Fun, likable, all those things. But it's a really human component to strategic communications at its core in public relations. Again, you're trying to orchestrate people to do things for you that you can't really pay them to validate you in ways that like you can't pay people to do. Like can't pay fortune to like write a story that includes my client in a positive strategic way.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
you
called
know,
advertising. That's
yeah.
called advertising.
And I think what happens is with technology or money, really, for that matter, if you have speed or resources, you kind of let all that other stuff go, that work and friction of public relations and relationship building, it goes away. It smooths out, right? And that's the psychology, right? So when you understand the psychology of like, if I have the resources to not try, to not earn, to not work through the friction, then I don't do it. That's just how people work, right? And so I think if you look at the through line for media, self-publishing, I think was the first big change for PR because you meet a lot of people. They're like, "Oh, I'm going to do PR. Like, let's talk about my social posts." And you're like, "Okay, we can loop that into the program, but that's not really the foundation,
Yeah,
right?"
yeah. That's the thank you for that, but dot dot dot. Let's
Yeah.
pivot. Yeah.
So I think that's been going on for a long time. And what I think is going to happen with AI is just all of those things are going to be kind of sped up. You're gonna, it's gonna get faster,
Mm,
noisier, you
agreed.
know, and all that kind of
Absolutely.
stuff. So I think it's just really continuation of that same through line, just, at hyper speed. The one thing that's really fascinating, I'm lucky as well that I work with a lot of people in AI that have like this, I don't know if this is just happenstance or if you just draw the type of people to you that have this kind of ethos, but everybody I'm working with in AI is like really locked in on like preserving humanity and like preserving creativity and making sure that it's not wonky and sloppy and
Yeah,
all that kind of stuff. And so
yeah.
there's a really strong thread of like, let's just really hold on to the stuff that makes humans tick. Now, that a lot of it's coming from the advertising and marketing people. So, because I think they get like how quickly this can get sideways,
Mhm.
and like they're trying to influence people, and if they put stuff in front of them and they're like, they know
Yeah.
that they lose, so they kind of
Yep.
there's a better mooring there. And so I think the PR ethos and those types of people in advertising and marketing we share the same space in a lot of ways. And when we talk, think and value things, they look and sound the same to some degree. But going back to the original stuff in PR, what we built, we really wanted this agency impact partners to be, really in the relationships matter and the ability to orchestrate interactions with the press that have scale, right? I'm not taking too much so that you don't want to work with me again, or I'm not sending someone to you that you're going to meet with that's going to spew marketing copy at you and have you be like, ew, as a journalist, ick,
Yeah,
And so
sure.
like understanding how it works and orchestrating in a way where you kind of like give the reporters what they need and you take what you need because the reporters are trying to take what they need, right? And they're mutually exclusive a lot of times. And so how do you push those two circles together in a way where there's just enough overlap for value creation, but it doesn't push too far into the other one's zone where you're like, okay, now you're like using me for clicks,
Yep.
as a journalist
Yep.
and like,
Yep.
now I'm being taken advantage of, or I'm pushing stuff at you that makes you feel gross and you don't want to work with us again. So you understand those intersections and that value creation and that orchestration. You have a wide enough aperture to understand how they come together in a balanced way. You get to do it again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
'Cause everyone's winning. But when it feels icky either way, everyone quits. So like
Yeah.
to me, that's like the core of public relations is like, how do you orchestrate that? And I just think that in the age of digital, I think most firms have been sucked into, I see firms I used to compete with, I won't use names, but I go to their sites now and they got a content marketing division. And I'm like, so you're
Mhm.
doing something different than me, right? I'm
Mhm.
leaning into human and relationships and that balance. And you're saying like, that's too hard. And so I'm going to go create something I can just control and
Mhm.
broadcast and push out.
Content farm.
Right.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so I think to me, that's a white flag of like whether or not you're a PR firm. Like when you start to rely a little too much on direct everything, it's not that you shouldn't have the ability to do it. But when it starts to become more of what you do in a day, I think you become I saw a lot of the marketing services holding companies that I've worked with and in, is that PR firms tend to get warped that direction once you're proximal to advertising, marketing, social media, all that stuff in the stack. You get a little changed. And we are agency of record for Stagwell. They own 18 PR firms. They use us for some strategic things, and
Hmm.
is really a strong validation of that whole message. What There's still something that's in that core of PR,
Yeah.
that relationships and orchestration that
Yeah.
matter. And
We,
you
s- we
can't.
we still, you're right. I mean, you nailed it. We still own the story. We still own the relationships. An orchestra can get together and play music, right? But they still need the person at the front to orchestrate timing and cadence. And I
Mhm.
just think there's a reason why PR people owned social media in the early days because it was still about the story and content before advertising existed. I think that PR people glommed on to using AI tools because it was just bleeding edge and it was about content initially. But there's this, to your point, the yin and yang, where I spend more time training tools than using them to make sure if I'm going to use them, that the content is still written from this. So if I'm telling a story about a nonprofit, it's not about like, give me some M dashes and some content that looks like AI slop, but it's really informed by real narrative and conversations. And you've got to spend the time. It's like the equivalent of training an account coordinator coming out of college and say, I'm going to give you 6 months of a ramp to show you how this is really done versus saying, hey, kid, go pitch the New York Times. Right. It's impossible. So it's just to your point, it's the same work, regardless of I'm pulling the book off the shelf from Barnes and Noble or today when, in 2 seconds, this podcast will be produced because I got AI behind it. It's just still about the story, about the relationship, and about people. And I love your analogy of making sure that the reporters you work with and that when you reach out to them, you're bringing value for them, but also politely and transparently saying, this is why I'm pitching the story to you because my client wants to tell the story and this is going to benefit them. But at the same time, reporter can smell marketing content a million miles away. And it's good to hear that you're focused on the balance between the two sides, which is great.
Yeah, and then going back to your AI comment, I mean, first of all, when we spoke, I was very inspired by what you are doing with AI and how are you using it. I think, the intelligence side of that is something we're seeing a lot of our clients working in where it's like, how do you use, directionally use the intelligence that you're gathering to kind of like make, our profession, the reason it gets morphed into a marketing firm when you're in a holdco is because that's better business, right? You can make more money, you have more margins. And the reason you don't have those in PR is because there's a lot of work that goes into it, right? All that orchestration, understanding, figuring out when you fit where, like that takes a lot of time. And what I got from what you were doing was that you were using that to kind of orchestrate like directionally, like, hey, here's where I need to be looking right now, and using your tools to kind of intelligently say, hey, this is the direction I need to go right this minute. And then the human takes over and drives it towards that opportunity. And I think that's a really smart way of using it. It's not about scale. It's about like understanding what you're seeing and orchestrating again in an intelligent way towards where the opportunities are, which, before took a lot of man hours and you just shaved a lot of those out. So I think that's the inspiration. If you're using AI to put plans together that should be 8 pages long and they're 15 because you used AI, you're not doing it right.
No,
You
not
know,
at all.
if you're like blasting notes out to like, 400 people instead of like maybe, 50 to 100 that are the right fit because you have the volume to gather them all, you're not doing it right. I think that all like, you know, and the problem is there are versions of like hyperscale voluminous things that have success,
Yep.
but I feel like they erode over time. And at some point, people drop out of those systems and they're like, yeah, I don't really want to either. But when you have like, and again, might be a little bit like the LSAT, right? Where you like what it takes to like score really well in the LSAT is great for most versions of practicing law, but apparently it's like uniquely bad for like the highest Supreme Court interpretate law kind of like conversations. And so
Hmm.
they're kind of mutually exclusive. I think AI, PR, and like all that kind of fits in the same bucket where like you can probably fire off a bunch of transactions and get some hits and all that kind of stuff. But like if you want to build a story that when you look back, you're like, that's one of the best stories that I've ever had on a client, or that's the best group of clients in a single story that I've ever seen. Like I think that's the work you can do when you're a little more human, and then the random scaling of hits and being in a lot of places at once with a quote is
Agreed.
probably you could still probably drive that with technology. So I
Agreed.
think it's a little bit of both.
I agree. Usually get to this point of the conversation, I get 20-ish minutes in. I always ask kind of an off-ball random question. And so in a minute or so, I'd love to have you tell me the story what's over your right-hand shoulder, which is the bookshelf. I see books, I see children, I see a little microcosm of your life. Give me the 30-second of Jay as the guy, not the agency owner, the PR guy. Like, who is Jay?
I'm I'm a consummate like zigger when people zag. Like it's weird for something in PR. Like I really, really enjoy like being outside of the noise and the circles. Mm, I think that's what's next is always sitting over there. And so
Love it.
what's there is like really like I'm a huge fan of anime. I've been a fan my whole life. My kids are as well. It's been a bonding thing for me. Like, so a lot of that back there is like
Love it.
Father's Day and Christmas stuff
Love it. Love
to
it.
get kids, which is really cool because when we moved from Hoboken in the New York Metro to Wisconsin, where we are now, just outside of Milwaukee, my kids moved here and they're like, you know, My Neighbor Totoro and like, Spirited Away and like all those Hayao Miyazaki films. And Hayao Miyazaki's kind of the Disney of Japan. That's what they were all watching and loving, and that's part of our culture. We moved to Wisconsin, and no kids here know what that is.
Well, it's an opportunity to train them, right? You bring a little PR skill to the community.
But here's what I found about it, and that's kind of like, again, that's an outlier. Like I never really liked the Disney format because I felt like it was very formulaic and like you could tell like it's kind of the stuff that capitalism will spit out. Like, yeah, it'll make money, it'll hit
Yeah.
all the right
Yeah.
notes,
Yeah.
but it doesn't like it's not like it doesn't like make me think or like
Yeah.
it doesn't add friction. It's like, wow, I've
Yeah.
never seen that before. You're like, there's a whole IP law reason sitting behind why that is.
Love it.
But I love the Japanese stuff because their IP law actually maintains the right of the artist. And so they have final say no matter who they sell it to,
Awesome.
whatever is produced under that IP, they have the final write off on it and it keeps it closer to its original creative form. Where in the US, that gets morphed and turned into like what will sell.
Yeah,
It gets
of course.
banned,
Of
for lack of
course.
a better term.
Blame the PR and marketing people.
Yeah, and so that's why, like, that's why you look over there. You got a little, you got like some alternative stuff, but you got some superheroes.
Very
You got
cool.
Demon Slayer back there.
Love that.
A little
Love it.
music. I'm a big music guy. Langhorne
Nice.
Swim poster.
There you
So
go.
that's kind of who I am.
I love that. I love the
def-
story behind the story.
I definitely will. I'm not a go with the flow person. I'm the person who's going to be like, why you
Love
keep
it.
talking about stuff that no one else is talking about?
Well, as we get to the wrap up here, where can people find you and connect with you? What's your networking platform
Yeah.
of choice?
Well, Jay Kolbe on LinkedIn. I just type it in, and then impactpartners.llc
Awesome.
is the URL. So
Excellent.
www.impactpartners.llc. Yeah, and then
Love it.
come have a chat if you want to have a chat that doesn't sound like a lot of other chats.
Absolutely.
You might
Absolutely. We'll definitely do this again. Jay, thanks for joining and coming down to the PR
having
bunker down here in Boston. We will definitely have a conversation again. Appreciate you being here. Good luck with
Thank
scaling
you.
the agency. Good luck with the family, the kids, and that mix and all that. Appreciate you being here, and it's been fun.
Thanks for having me, Don.
Not a
Fantastic.
problem.
Thanks for tuning in to the PR Bunker podcast, where we go beyond the headlines and into the trenches with founders, builders, and operators making real moves. This show is brought to you by the PR Bunker, a strategic communications agency helping mission-driven and impact-focused organizations cut through the noise and tell stories that matter. Want to learn more? Head to prbunker.com and subscribe to The Bunker Briefing, our monthly email newsletter packed with a 45-second read that's stacked with value. We're talking practical PR and communications insights, networking tips, and strategies to help you navigate the moments that matter. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. We've got more raw, real conversations on the way. So stay locked in. Until next time, keep building, stay resilient, and remember, momentum favors the bold.